very talented director, the star of every entertainment media we have in this country. In just a moment, we'll begin the program after this brief message. Jerry, thanks for being here tonight.
My pleasure, David.
I want to begin by asking you the question I suppose everybody that is involved in any way with motion pictures has always wanted to ask you. You've made about 30 motion pictures. They've grossed 33. They've grossed about $204 million. You've never had a motion picture that lost money in an age when 8 out of 10 movies lose money. What do you think accounts for that incredible record of motion picture achievement in terms of financial success?
Well, I think that the financial success is motivated by the fact that people have to pay an admission. It starts with that. I think, too, that the word fan, F-A-N, a fan of someone, is a everlasting thing, particularly if you're fortunate enough, as I have been, to deal with the young people who, by necessity, grow up, I should say, and they take those wonderful formative years feelings with them. I have met people, David, that are 20 and 25 years old that introduce me to their children who think that the image, Jerry, or the nut, or the idiot, whatever you want to call them, is pretty funny, or they've had fun. That's two generations, the child, the adult. I think that is what constitutes big box office. I've grown up with an awful lot of the fans, and I think they know that it's expedient for me to let them know that I am grateful. Yet, I think they know that I am grateful whether it's advantageous or not. I think they can sense it.
Is it true that your pictures, Jerry, are essentially children's pictures, that they're deliberately made for children, and they're released invariably? You make 2 a year, I think, and they're released at Easter time when they're out of school, and again at Christmas.
Summer, Easter, or Christmas. I write them with children in mind, but at the same time, when I was once asked, it's a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, and I say, that's right, who takes them?
Parents.
Parents. So you get the parents by way of the fact that how's a child of 5, 6, or 7 going to go to a movie? What with today's speed and traffic and so on. So you will get the adults, whether they like it or not, and they're not about to let you know.
Does the adult come in with a kind of chip on his shoulder? He's doing a parental act of responsibility, bringing the kid to see a Jerry Lewis picture?
Yeah, he does that he does it at the box office.
He does.
When he's buying the ticket, he lets the outer exterior appear to be somewhat uncomfortable at having to subject himself to this. But when the lights are down and he's in that theater, you'll always find an adult getting the fantastic pleasure out of seeing the child happy. Because if you love your children, there are 3 things I, as a father, I am enthralled with. That's when my baby eats with nourishment, when he sleeps peacefully and breathes peacefully, and when he laughs from the belly. So when an adult sits and watches one of their children laughing happily, he must, of necessity, laugh or feel good that the child is laughing. And you can't look at the child this way for an hour and a half because you can get a bent neck. So you will turn to look on the screen, and you will invariably see an adult do this. Because it's not made for him, and he's really frightened that the neighbor next door may catch him laughing at this idiocy, when he himself is really no older when it comes to enjoying himself than the child. Because we are all children, really. We all want to laugh at the simple things. We would like to be sophisticates, because that's exceptional. Yet I looked up the word sophisticate, and when I saw that Webster calls sophisticate unreal and phony, I don't want to be a sophisticate anymore.
You're delighted, pleased at being the children's delight.
No. I cannot honestly say to you that I wouldn't like the jet set or the sophisticates, as it were. I couldn't tell you I wouldn't want them to embrace me, because I would like not only the children, but the sophisticates and everybody. I cannot sit here and tell you that there's a cult or there's a group that I don't. I want them all. I would be a liar if I didn't tell you that. I may not get the very best table at Pavillon, but I'm the kingpin at the automat, I'll tell you that.
Jerry, in recent years, the screen says, invariably written by Jerry Lewis, directed by Jerry Lewis, produced or co-produced by Jerry Lewis, starring Jerry Lewis.
Or co-directed,
or co-directed.
No, co-written. There's co or all the way.
Whereas a few years back, you confined yourself to being the star of the film. Why recently have you taken over more and more of the total creation of the movie?
Well, I had done it for many, many years, but quietly. It's only of late that we have allowed it to be known, only in that the Directors Guild of America is not about to allow me to waive the credit. The Writers Guild of America wants to know if this material is my screenplay, and you better get your name on it. The Screen Producers Guild, the same way. Now, if you're a triple threat or if you're a four-way operator, you have to have the credits. That's mandatory. I didn't really choose to do this because, well, I'm doing everything. That's a preconceived notion on the parts of people that aren't aware of what they're talking about.
It's not ego.
It has nothing to do with ego because each job represents 8 hours. I would like to just act for 8 hours if you'll get me Billy Wilder to be the director. But I will not settle for less than what I am capable of doing. I am not as good as Billy Wilder, by no means. One day I'd like to be half as good. I'd like to be as good as Mr. Hitchcock, Mr. Mankiewicz, Stanley Kubrick. I can name some marvelous directors. Blake Edwards, Danny Mann, George Marshall, Norman Turog, Frank Tashlin. I'd like to be as good as all of them. They're not all available. When they are not available, what do? Sit? Do I not make film? So when I found this to be so, and the tax structures and the independent companies, this has become an independent industry, where we make our product and we sell and distribute through other companies and so on. When I learned that this was going to be happening, I made up my mind to make it my business to learn everything from sound recording, the 9-inch cycle of videotape, picture, and soundtrack. I can pull a BNC apart, rethread it, load it, tell you every technical aspect of the motion picture business to a degree. I'm still learning. But I have to know, because one day, at the rate things are going, I may have to operate the camera. I've had to learn cinematography, set decoration. I wanted to know everything because every job helps you be better in all of the other jobs. When you know what a man goes through and every individual technician's problems, you can assist them, you can help them. In most cases, many of the people in our business work in one particular area. I think it's dangerous to interchange those areas and having everyone get into every other aspect, but you could be such tremendous help to a man. But by telling him what you have in mind and explaining and knowing his problems, you can tell it easier.
But if you write the script, Jerry, and you direct yourself and you act, how can you criticize yourself when you are all things? Does Jerry the actor say to Jerry the writer, that scene isn't good enough, Jerry the writer?
Yes.
Redo it.
Yes.
You do?
Absolutely.
Discipline, then.
Because at home, where I do most of my writing, I am Daddy. Now we get back to the children's differential between Daddy and Jerry. I write at home, I go to the office in the morning, and Carol, my secretary, will take the material, put it in a Mimeo, and when I get it back some 3 hours later, it's a new introduction to the material for me. I was up very late the night before, till all hours. The material's very fresh in my mind. When it comes from Mimeo at 3 in the afternoon, it's a reintroduction. It's a new examination. I'm looking at it not in my typewritten hand, because Carol will redo it for me. I will then look at it from her redoing it to Mimeo, which is just stenciling. And I'm reading some man's written word. And I don't like an awful lot of the things I see, because it's the bright hours of the morning, my mind is sharp, I'm awake, and I start cursing this idiot for this stupidity. And I scratch, and I order a rewrite, and when I get the note at home, I will say, who the hell does he think he is? And it's me. Now, how can I get me on a phone and yell at me?
Easily,
so I'm trying to build a two-way
on
phone. But the same thing happens, David, with direction. I will send a note, I will give Carol a memo, be sure that I pick up this 2-shot. I can't bridge the cut. I can't go from the master to the single. I've got to delicately make this cut. I need a 2-shot, an intermediate cut. When I get it on the set, a blue memo from my office, pick up said piece in said scene, I'm infuriated at having to do something I have already done, or having to add a piece of material that appears by this memo that I didn't get in the first place, and I literally take objection to the memo.
You're mad at yourself.
I'm infuriated at having to do it. Now, there are days, Dave, when I will not adhere to the memo, and then sit in the cutting room the following night and say, why didn't I get it? And Carol will turn to me and say, because you didn't want to do as you said.
Jerry, do you have freedom? Does anyone in your work, in the making of a movie, fetter you or censor you or overrule you?
Yes.
You do have censorship.
I have the most critical people that are surrounding me, that envelop my whole life. I have enough backslappers and hijair. I have enough people laughing at straight lines. I have some people that laugh at questions. But I have a marvelous group of people, my own staff, who are constantly critical of me. Constantly.
You have a rather large retinue of people who work for you, people who've been with you for years. Are they essentially yes men?
I don't have one of those.
You don't?
No.
These are people whom you trust and whom you have particular confidence?
Implicitly, so much so that I am sorry to say not one of the people that worked for me, from Carol Saraceno, my secretary, to Bill Richmond, the writer, Lou Brown, my conductor, Dick Gerard, my right arm, all of these people, Hal Bell, Jim Wright, Jim Babcock, Ann, Ruth, Marshall, oh, what names I can give you.
How big a payroll do you have around the clock, around the year?
Oh, runs $60, $70.
No, I don't, Jerry, I don't mean, I mean, how many people are you constantly employing?
My very, very own operation is about 21 people. And there isn't one of them that I believe is paid enough. I think they're all underpaid for what I get in return. Their affection and their love and their prayers and their hope. When I hurt, they hurt. My whole organization gets rattled if I'm not feeling well. If I'm happy and my heart's happy, we have the happiest operation. They all take on my attitude. And that, to me, is an indication of affection. I don't think I'm getting it without giving it. But I give an awful lot of love because I have it to give, and I get a great deal more in return. These are all marvelous human beings that are delighted with what I do and sad for when it's wrong. And they don't have to tell me when it's wrong, because when I make a terrible mistake or if my judgment is poor, they know that the punishment is self-inflicted immediately. When I do very well, they know by my happy heart that they don't have to say well done. So I neither get well done or terrible. I do it pretty much myself. I've made some pretty large mistakes, but I'm not ashamed to make the admissions that they were terrible mistakes.
What are your big mistakes? What do you think they are?
Well, one of my big mistakes is not being able to function operating as big a business as I do. I have never really learned how to be, quote, a mechanical businessman. My emotion knows no reason. I have no way to confer with it. I would like to confer with it and say, please don't cry because you have to fire that man who is throwing your whole operation into a tizzy. I can't fire him. I have found, by way of examination, that a competent man, one who is completely competent, is the easiest man to fire. One who is incompetent, one who can't cut the mustard, is given what I call God's compensation. Like, I'm sure you have seen God's compensation over the years. A very, very ugly individual is given the voice of a bird or an opera star. Someone who is physically deformed by some quirk of God's doing or something, I don't know. They are given an extrasensory something. They're given keen eyesight when there's a loss of hearing. I think a human being can touch beautifully when there's a loss of sight. One sense takes over for the other. I think in an individual who is an incompetent, God gives them an additional compensation, and that is the inability. They can inflict upon the boss the inability to dismiss them. They can make it so difficult by the mere fact that they're incompetent that you can't fire them. But I had an attorney once who was probably the finest attorney in the world. Many, many years ago, I fired him in 2 seconds. That quickly, because I knew he'd walk out the door and have a fine position down the hall. An incompetent has nowhere to go. I can't fire him.
Are you suggesting that you've got a body of incompetence?
No, I'm suggesting that there is a couple of areas in an overall crew I'm not talking of my staff. I'm talking about when I have a full picture crew. If I have a technician who isn't doing the job or displeases me or does other than what I suggest, and he's completely competent, the technician, I can fire him in a second. But if he's a technician who hasn't got all of the mustard to cut, but tries desperately, and yet he's not going to get hired that quickly, I can't fire him.
Could it have something to do, Jerry, and I'm not an analyst or anything, but could it have something to do with your needing to be loved? If you fire that guy, he won't love you anymore.
More than likely. I couldn't say to you as a qualified anything. I don't know that that's the case, but it's very likely. I don't want him to be displeased, but at the same time, it's not as much will he not love me, it's how can I bear to live through what pressure I may have brought to bear. How can I do that to me and him? I think it's much more a selfish thing. I think I couldn't stand going through the torment of what I must have done to him and his whole structure.
Do you have pictures or nightclub engagements or television projects or anything where you think you goofed badly, and if you had it to do over again, you would do it quite differently?
Yes. My 2-hour television show is something that I think there are 1,000 places I could blame it on, but I think in the end result I have to blame it on myself. I'm sure that this must come off for anyone listening or watching as, isn't that nice? He's taking it all on himself. Well, I have come to find out after the first bitter feeling and so on that I had, that if I can resent a writer saying this comedian didn't do this material, or here's the resentment. A writer will say the writers didn't come up with very good material. Now this is the writer's side of my complexity. I believe that the writer should not ever be attacked because the writer presents to the comic material. The comic has accepted it for being good. Now, if he can't rise above it or make it good or better, he's the guy that needs the rap, not the writer. That's what I believe. So, with my show on the other network for 2 hours, I am the one that's the heavy, because I allowed to happen what happened.
I'd like to get back to the television show because the whole country wondered why it didn't work. But we have to pause. We'll be right back.
My emotional...
Jerry, we're back on the air, and I wanted to ask you something. Both of us have lived our lives with the critics'